Well, hey, messy people. Welcome to the Everything's Messy podcast. Today I have back Haywood White, our hopefully to become resident expert health coach. I'm super excited that he's back. If you have not listened to his first episode where he talks about himself and the things that he's familiar with, go back to episode number 7. He's got all of that packed in for you. It's a really great episode. He talks about his messy story and the things that he's gone through. And I've got him back today. First of all, hi, Haywood, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
How was your Thanksgiving? How was baby's first Thanksgiving?
It was great. He spent it with a lot of family. We all ate probably a little bit more than we should have.
Yeah. So
I've left.
does he get passed around? Does he like that? Or is he more like hands off, gonna get cranky?
We've been really blessed. He likes pretty much everybody and
Oh,
everything. It's really rare for him to start getting cranky, honestly. And when
oh,
he
that's so
does,
great.
it's pretty obvious what he wants, and it's easy to like give him a toy or feed him or put him down for a nap, and he's back to normal really quickly.
That's
So
so
Thanksgiving is
cool.
pretty much just a lot of family passing around.
Getting ready for baby's first Christmas then,
Yeah,
right? That's
absolutely.
coming.
Gonna be
Yeah,
exciting. Yeah.
that's so cool.
Yeah, we were all texting back and forth about it today, actually, finally putting the plans together. It's weird that it's already December. Like,
I say that, and my husband always is like, "Oh my gosh, it comes every year. Why are you saying that?" But it does feel like it either comes faster and faster, or how did we get here already? Like it does feel that.
I feel like between Halloween and Thanksgiving and then all the rest of the holidays, once the ball starts rolling, it all
It
just
doesn't stop.
goes by in a flash. And next
Yep,
thing, 2 months have gone by.
absolutely. All right. Well, what have you got for us today? What are we talking about? I've got a few people that have emailed me about migraine stuff. So maybe what that's our jumping off point, or however
Yeah.
you want to take it.
Yeah. If you have any questions that people have, or I can just dive into some stuff. I was thinking we could just have kind of a conversation.
Absolutely.
Something I didn't get into a whole lot last time. I do want to kind of qualify some core beliefs of
Okay.
my program and kind of where I'm coming from, because I think that'll
Please
help our
do. Yeah,
conversation.
go
So
for it.
I operate from two main belief systems. So first being what I call bio individuality, the second being what I call multidimensional health. So
Okay. Break
both are
that down for us.
so by where do you want me to write it down?
No, like no, break it down. Break it down
Oh,
as far as
I
yeah, yeah.
apologize.
No, no, no. Break it down as far as
My
yeah, give
whiteboard.
me some context with the first and the second.
So both are a little self-explanatory, but just to dive into it, bioindividuality is the idea that we all have different genetic factors, metabolic rates, responses to different foods and lifestyle factors, et cetera, et cetera. And so the idea is to present this information in a way that's non-dogmatic, for I guess for a lack of a better word. So as we dive into these topics, I want our listeners to be exploring them in a way that's more experimental, as opposed
Okay.
to learning what the quote unquote last word is.
Okay.
The
Okay,
last
that
word
makes sense.
is different for every person. And
Okay.
so we're going to be playing with some different ideas. It's sharing our own experiences. You've mentioned you've had some migraine triggers. I think that'll be exciting to dive into a little bit. And ultimately trying to expand the conversation so that people have a lot more information at their disposal
Okay.
to draw what their bio individual plan for migraines or their response might be,
I
as
love
a
that. I love that.
doctor
All right.
telling them it's just blood vessel restriction or whatnot.
Sure.
So the second thing is multidimensional health. And migraines are actually a really good example for explaining this. So the idea of multidimensional health is the idea that health problems might not have one single cause. And while you might typically, when we say things like this, we're talking about tracing things back to the root cause.
Okay.
I use it kind of in the context that things could have multiple root causes. So migraine,
100%. Yeah.
and again, all this is super self-explanatory. I think it's helpful to ground these conversations into these topics
Okay.
so that when we are introducing these things, it's kind of in the context of these core ideas. And so this multidimensional idea in the context of migraines is like two of the macro methods in my approach and in my health coaching practice are obviously nutrition and
Hmm.
then posture therapy. So
What kind of therapy? Posture
Postural.
therapy. Okay. Okay.
I wrote down a big word right here. So the largest cranial nerve in the brain is called the trigeminal nerve. I might be mispronouncing that.
Okay.
Uh, Basically, this is the nerve that's most closely associated with migraines. The idea is blood vessels restrict, squeeze this nerve, cause some sort of hyperstimulation and a spasmic effect. And
Okay.
it's like the typical mainstream medical consensus. And I'm putting that really, really simply.
Sure. Sure. We're going to refer to it as the messy nerve.
But yeah, that's the messy nerve, the trigeminal nerve. And
Yep.
so the idea is tracing back to the root, and it's not always to do with this nerve, migraines,
Sure.
but typically this is the most associated nerve. So
Okay.
tracing back to the root, the idea would be what is causing strain on this nerve? Like what's causing it? What is the root cause of this nerve?
Why is it angry?
Exactly. And so the multi-dimensional approach would be, or let me try the other approach first. So a kind of a single dimensional approach would be to say, if I were to only approach it from a nutritional way or
Okay.
only approach it from a posture way. So for nutrition, tends to be this nerve and its overstimulation tends to be associated with a deficiency in magnesium, riboflavin, and a variety of other vitamins. But on the flip side, posture wise, many of us, actually, the large majority of us in America, especially, are dealing with a cervical misalignment. We all have neck pain,
Okay. Yeah.
all craning over our phones and our computers all the time causes what's called cervical flexion. And without getting too technical on that, it's basically just a misalignment of the vertebrae at the top of the spine that are the neck.
Okay.
And so the idea is when that misalignment happens, all of your nerves, your entire central nervous system converges right here at the top of your spine and goes into.
Lovely.
So when that is misaligned, you're literally squeezing and adding tension and pressure on every single one of those nerves all the time.
Okay.
That's actually a major part of what chiropractic is people think it's just about bones. It is, but the idea is you realign the bones to relieve pressure on the nerves, which can relieve a whole lot of symptoms if you ever
Sure.
talk to a chiropractor.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is the multidimensional approach would be utilizing the nutritional and the postural approach as opposed to just uh, looking at it from one. And again, I'm both are kind of self-explanatory. I'm kind of over explaining these more simple ideas that all of us do kind of operate with anyways. But I do just feel like it's helpful to ground these
Oh,
conversations.
absolutely. Absolutely. So you touched very briefly on the deficiencies, right?
Yeah.
And I know I take several supplements, one of them being magnesium. And sometimes, I'll have a month that's less occurring of migraines. Others I don't. I used to chalk it up to my female cycle and things like that. You have the big estrogen dump after your cycle and then all of these things. But I've started to notice that in my, diet specifically, if, I have maybe a cheat day or something that I shouldn't be having, I sense it immediately. Oh my gosh, there's a migraine coming on. So talk a little bit about that. I know that was kind of a two-part question, but talk a little bit about that.
So can you just simplify the question for me really quick?
Sure. So I was just saying, you were talking about the vitamin deficiencies. You mentioned magnesium. Let's start there. What other deficiencies? You said riboflavin. Is it as easy as just taking a multivitamin? Because, like I said, with me, I do supplement with magnesium, but sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So start there.
Yeah. So this honestly could lead me into a much deeper conversation about supplementing and nutrition, which is one of my expertises, and honestly might be very useful here. So let's look at it from this multidimensional perspective. Multidimensionality, I like to say, is transitory. And to put
Okay.
that in really simple terms is you can have different problems over a span of time. And so like for your example, not that I know what's happening, but just for the sake of pretending to guess, you could have, let's say, the middle of the summer, you're walking around and sweating more frequently than you're aware of, and you're excreting an excess of magnesium relative to what you're used to, and so you are relatively deficient based on what your
Okay.
body's used to. So you may
Okay.
notice and again, this is just like some
Sure.
random
Sure,
guess
sure,
of
sure.
make a point. But you may notice during that time of the year that you take magnesium and it helps your migraines. Well, then the winter may come around and you're walking around, you're cold and you're extra tense in your body, and you have this cervical misalignment that becomes more pronounced than usual. And then the pendulum kind of shifts. So the migraines aren't so much caused by the nutritional stuff, but now are being caused by the postural stuff. So the taking extra magnesium might not actually help for that problem. So
Okay.
again,
Okay.
not that that's what's happening, but this just
Sure. That's an example.
like an example of multidimensionality is and this is something that I really like to a point that I really like to make with people when I'm talking this way is that this is where learning your body and learning how your body responds to these things kind of is your responsibility.
Absolutely.
And like it's no one really can give you like the magic key or
Right.
like
You have, yeah. And I've said that many times on this podcast that we have to be our own self advocate for our health and really get in tune as much as we can. And sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong, but we have to keep trying and keep going back to, the first step of what did work and then work from there. At least that's how I try to do it. So,
and just to the nutritional stuff too, I do want to dive into that a little bit because nutrition is a really, really broad topic.
sure.
It's not only broad, but there's a lot of depth to it.
Sure.
Like there are trillions of reactions in your body that take place every second, and nutrients largely catalyze every single one of those.
Yep.
So to even plot out, map out, and understand these processes are probably going to take us another 1,000 generations. I
That's
mean,
incredible.
not actually, but like
Sure. I'm
so,
sure.
so
It's,
it's just
it's,
we don't it's hard to understand completely, but there are some fundamental things that are true for most people, right? So um for the average person, they are going to be nutritionally deficient probably across the board. Magnesium, calcium, B vitamins,
yeah.
fatty acids, minerals especially. And not because they're lazy or stupid or
No,
something
it's
like
just
that,
it's
but
hard, yeah,
because
unless you're going out and seeking that and figuring out what that actually like I, did a huge rabbit hole on just trace minerals alone, and talk
oh yeah,
about being overwhelmed and making it complicated.
oh yeah. That's
But
that's really funny. Yeah, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, that I was just gonna say that that's a whole other just dimension that you just have to be ready to go down, and it was very overwhelming and certainly not in my expertise, but it's something that I'm trying to educate myself about because I do, what I have been able to process about it is extremely important.
Honestly, trace minerals are kind of like the central point of nutritional deficiencies because mainstream nutrition, the FDA doesn't recognize trace minerals as essential,
Right.
and it's bizarre.
It
And so
it
yeah, it's bizarre.
it
And
really is.
it's like not only is there a overwhelming amount of information about trace minerals alone, but there's no real authority to teach it to you. And not that we should be like outsourcing our critical thinking to authority and that sort of thing, but there's not like millions of dollars being
Sure.
invested in research and
Sure.
trace minerals about everything else. And so how would we even have the resources to know?
Yeah, we wouldn't.
But this is a pretty serious thing too, because trace minerals, one of my nutritional mentors, his name's Ryan Alexander, and he was mentored by someone named Dr. Joel Wallach, who's considered kind of one of the pioneers of nutrition and
Okay.
especially medicine. And a few of his central points are around trace minerals, around how ancestrally we got them, and for kind of the reasons why we're missing them largely in our diets today. So like the reasonings would be a variety of things. So as far as the food goes, so we used to get our food minerals in our food from like dams and glacial flow, basically. Like
Okay.
rivers would carry like a variety of like humic shale or fossilized minerals just in the water supply and would naturally irrigate soils in certain areas. And so like the Fertile Crescent, most of the places where civilization emerged, you'll find have an excess of natural trace minerals in their water supply.
Okay.
Well, about 80 years ago, we started damming up all the rivers and we started really disrupting that natural irrigation
Yeah.
process. On the flip side, especially um, when it comes to things like refined carbohydrates, grains, all that stuff, like the not only did we not like eat nearly as much as we eat today of all that stuff, but from a nutritional perspective, typically grain recipes were cut with wood ash,
Sure.
burnings of wood, which were largely our ancestors' main sources of trace minerals. And
Okay.
not only are you going to not find that anywhere today, but
We now
even
have added things added to our wheat and things that we're eating that what was it back in the early 90s they started spraying everything with it,
oh,
and now we can't, we can't escape it unless
I
we're growing it ourselves. And even then the soil seems to be so depleted with all of the necessary so you really have to have a, chemistry degree to be able to treat the pH in the dirt for it to even grow to what you need it to be.
yep. And most of the chemists that do have the degrees are investing their knowledge into making it worse.
100%.
But
Yes.
just to the point I was trying to make though ultimately was that I want to ground this into what I was trying to say though, which is it is really difficult to get these minerals for not only these natural reasons that we're kind of going over, like not only the food quality being disparaged, but on the flip side as well, humans like us, our digestive systems don't do as good of a job at absorbing those nutrients either because of, you probably talked about all of the reasons on this podcast before: toxic environments, toxic foods, toxic lifestyles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And
Seed
so,
oils, gluten, all of the wonderful stuff that just are going to chip away at that digestive system.
oh yeah. And there's a whole like metaphysical side to that too. It's like, we live in a world right now that's under a serious amount of chronic stress all the time. And it's like we're all probably in some low level of fight or flight, and that disrupts digestion.
Well,
Million reasons
well,
just
not
like
just the chronic stress, but chronic inflammation due to that. So
yes.
our bodies are constantly having to fight some sort of something that it just it's going back to, you were talking about the ancestors. Yes, there was some sort of survival mode they were in, so they had that, but I feel like now it's completely different, and our bodies are having a hard time adapting. Like it's not supposed to adapt to it.
Well, there, I like to say, this is the way I like to put it. We have brains that evolved for 200,000 years to build fires and live in caves. And we are trying to create large hadron colliders with them. So, yeah, we are not, we're monkeys in this broader artificialized concrete jungle that we've created, and we're all struggling to reconcile, have reason through it.
Yes.
And yeah, we're all terrified.
Yeah.
And so it's like, there's a really serious side to that, which is what and this brings me around to a conversation I was having last time too about our leaders, especially our health leaders, is like who is responsible for talking about these things and taking action about them and speaking up and helping to make sure the populace is aware that like, hey, you know, the way like literally the way that our infrastructure is oriented is not very good for us,
No, no. And it's certainly, people like you who are, trying to get a message out there, and others like you. And I hope people are waking up and paying attention, because I think, respectively, those who we thought were an authority in that field are not somebody that I am going to give the authority to. I don't listen to that. And I'm always bunking the conventional medicine type things. And I've said before, I think as far as our crisis and our emergency medicine in this country, it's absolutely bar none. But remove that crisis and emergency, and you're just talking maintenance or getting to the root cause or things like that. I think that's why they call it practicing medicine. I've said that before. They're trying to figure it out, but they're also not. They're looking at your symptoms, prescribing you something for your symptoms, which then bring on other symptoms. And they're not actually looking at, what your diet is, what your lifestyle is, what are you putting, people seem to be so afraid of, salt intake. That's a huge thing. They watch their salt intake, but they have no problem eating Cheetos, or, it's like it's unbalanced to me. I don't understand it. I get, told all the time I'm so unhealthy because I'm eating red meat. But they're downing Dr. Pepper, whatever it is they're doing. It's like, I'm trying to eat the most bioavailable thing I can possibly do. How is that? How am I shunned from eating the red meat when all of these, toxic food, like literally toxic foods are out there?
Well, a wise man once said, "Man is most ignorant of what he's most assured." There's
Very
something to be
good.
said
Yeah,
about
absolutely.
absolute scientific dogmatism, which permits, and that's we're digressing a little bit. I do want to go back to migraines and nutrition,
Yes,
but
no,
I want to
absolutely.
make a point because this touches on I know you commented on it yesterday. I've been behind the scenes putting a lot of what I'm calling the big pharma playbook together.
I love it.
Um, Largely, like what we're seeing is, and I'm gonna kind of experiment with my thinking on this a little bit, just on this podcast right now,
Sure,
just
sure. Go for it.
because I am exploring in a way that's exactly like that, which is like, from a rational perspective, doctors are wrong about a lot, manipulated about things. Science, like a clinical science, has a lot of conflict of interest, fault, withholding, like so on and so forth. You could say that there's like a honestly, here's a good one. Have you ever heard of Vioxx before?
Mm-mm.
Uh, so Vioxx was a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug that was marketed in the late 1990s and early 2000s as like an alternative to Advil and acetaminophen,
Okay.
and it's meant to be like a kind that was way easier on your gut, and so got prescribed like crazy for like 3 years. It turns out in like 2004, they had a huge controversy because some whistleblower released a ton of data that they had withheld, basically connecting their drug to cardiovascular diseases.
Oh
And
my
it gets
gosh.
crazy, even crazier. I actually have got some notes written down from the playbook I'm putting together. I'll bring us up really quick, and then we'll jump back to migraines and nutrition and stuff. But basically, all right. So basically, the Vioxx producers, I don't have I think it was
Sure.
I think it was Purdue, but I don't have it off the top of my head right now. But the Vioxx producers, basically their methodology for selling this pill and approving it, especially, they marketed it as this like gut healthy Advil, basically. But behind the scenes, they had someone named Dr. Scott Rubin, who they called a key opinion leader.
Mhm.
Right?
Key opinion leader.
Really important. This is a really important point to understand, like this larger pharmaceutical medical infrastructure. So Dr. Scott Rubin spent 1995 to 1999 publishing dozens of quote unquote peer reviewed research papers on Vioxx. He was solely responsible for their clinical approvals. So he was the only one. It just all these other doctors were reviewing his stats and stuff. So scandal hits the fan. People start investigating. It turns out not only did this guy and the company withhold this information about the links between cardiovascular diseases, but he had lied about the drug's efficacy. It literally did not do what it was meant to do. So they made, I don't, let me see actually, let me Google how much they made off of this.
That's incredible. First of all, I'm loving the title of the key opinion doc. That's a good title. But just, not trying to make light of it. That's just incredible to me, the power they have in order to do that.
Well, I can't find how much they made off of it, but they made billions of dollars like every other
Sure.
firm, or probably hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
And they probably got like a 10 to $20 million fine that was a fraction of the profit they made, and went on doing the same thing. And the broader point is this: when we have an example like this, it begs a question, which is this an isolated incident, or did they just get caught doing what they always do? Right? And that's a really, really interesting question, because people that are into science and into mainstream medicine would tell you like, oh, this was just a transparency issue. Like, it's a good thing this happened because it's not going to happen again or whatever. But that's the thing, is when you dive into it, this happens all the time.
Right. Right.
It's you could say like and I'm about to make kind of a bold statement here, but you know, outside of accusing people of having malicious intentions, the large majority of people participating in peer-reviewed science have spent a decade of their lives and hundreds of thousands of dollars to qualify themselves as quote unquote professionals. They've
Wow.
invested everything that they have and everything that they are. And then typically they get put in these situations where a company like Purdue or like Procter and Gamble or like Pfizer is giving them $10 million and saying, research this drug and like kind of, like make
Right.
sure it's safe. And not only that, but then um there's this kind of bigger conversation around people in like a religious sense. Scientists want their science to be right.
Of
Like they don't
course.
want to have to question it because it's like a church to them. It's like a
Of
way for them to outsource their own personal mystery, and the
sure.
ambiguity along with that to the certainty of a leader. And it's we all do it to some capacity, but science is no different. So when you look into it, it's like you have a lot of examples like Dr. Scott Rubin and Vioxx who are actively lying and actively deceiving people with like no excuse. But it gets interesting because almost across the board, outside of that, even if people aren't meaning to lie, even if people aren't meaning to deceive, most people are more than willing to fudge some numbers or
Skew the
lie or
statistics to make it.
withhold this
Yeah.
one little point, or even during the experimentation, maybe you'll unconsciously slight your hand and affect the outcome in some way
Sure.
without you being aware of it, because in the core of your being, you've invested your entire life into this project, ultimately in some capacity. And so if it fails, you fail.
Right. Right. So they want to see some sort of return on their investment.
There's an identity association. And so it's like we have science, medicine in a large way, like in this context. And I want to qualify this too by saying there is a lot of good science. Like
Sure.
we when we talk about carnivore food, nutrition, we're talking about science. We're talking about empirically. We're
Sure.
using our own experience and we're being open-minded to alternative ideas, and we're not um, relying on some sort of dogmatic absolutism, which is what you see in the scientific world. It's like you're not supposed to trust the science. That's an anti-scientific concept. It's a religious concept, if you ask me. Have faith in God, which I do have faith in God, but
Right. No, I understand what you're saying. I see the
it's a similar
comparison.
concept. And
Yeah.
so it's like it's someone coming along and exercising a false authority to manipulate the thinking of the populace.
Right.
So it's like it's a vicious beast, and it's something that's like it speaks to like our own faults, our own self-deceptive faults as humans, like
Sure.
as opposed to like that doctors are bad or that big pharma is bad, even though there is a lot of that. But just to bring this all back around, because we kind of did dive down the
No,
rabbit
and hey, it's messy. We get messy, and that's what
hole.
the whole point of this. But yeah, to circle back to migraines, talk a little bit about just like I was saying, I notice well, I noticed two things. I will have sort of a Hashimoto's flare up and I'll seem to get that under control. But then the residual seems to be the migraine. I don't know if my body's purging out the inflammation or whatever it was, but that is, one of those multi-dimension things you were talking about. But can also trace it to cycle, and I can also trace it to food. And then of course stress, and I can sense it coming on. And I know most people who suffer can sense it. Like for me, I smell something first. I smell like a metallic-y type smell, and I'm just like, oh, I know exactly what's coming. And it might be an hour or two before it actually sets in, but I had that smell first because of it. And it's always the same symptoms leading up to it, but it seems to be different cursors that are a jumping off point for it. So
That's really interesting about the metallic smell, first of all, or the metallic taste. I wish I had some fun fact or
yeah.
to run with that one. I got nothing.
It could be I'm just a weirdo, but
Because I've
that's
I've heard that before.
have
And
you?
so
Okay.
yeah, so that's just I could dive down some guesses, but I don't I feel like I don't know, that would be an interesting thing to learn about and come to some definitive answers. But the point that I was trying to make nutrition wise was what you're talking about with this Hashimoto's flare up and like affecting ultimately the migraines and everything else. Um, and this is a kind of a central point of holistic medicine, is that none of these systems are isolated from each other.
Right.
And they all affect each other all the time. In fact, they're supposed to. And it's
Sure.
like they all have to work properly. And so it's like, and again, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but it's interesting that we don't really think about it that way. We're not taught to think about it that way. Um, if you have a thyroid issue, thyroid hormone, it largely dictates a lot of our metabolism. Our thyroid hormone is responsible for methylating nutrients in the body and is largely responsible for the methylation response in the body. But you can get really technical about, but that's basically like what turns think like raw oil and refined gasoline. Methylation is raw
Right.
nutrients into refined nutrients. And so your thyroid is largely what dictates that. You see this sometimes with people who have Hashimoto's. I didn't have Hashimoto's, but I have with thyroid, so I kind of went through the same thing. Like when you jumpstart that metabolism again, you can have all sorts of effects. Like you can have an inflammatory.
Positive or negative?
Both.
Okay.
So that's what I'm getting into is like you can have a lot of negative effects, which is something people are surprised about, and not like bad, like you shouldn't do it, but like short term, like body returning to balance negative effects.
Sure, sure. And it feels like a purge almost. And it's like it's like getting out whatever it was having an effect to, but it hurts.
This is an interesting point where we could talk about how inflammation really is a necessary process. And when we do jumpstart our metabolism, largely we're jumpstarting our production of inflammatory cytokines as well. And so it's like we see this all the time with people with my new patient or my new clients almost across the board. I have to preface the program by being like, healing hurts at first, because while almost everyone gets relief for their immediate symptoms, almost everyone has some negative side effects that come along too.
Sure.
So it's like it's just the interesting thing about the body is you're never really going to figure out what's really going on if you don't allow yourself to kind of feel into
Gotta
the
feel the
discomfort.
pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, to that point too, again, it's the same thing as like I could go on a million different guesses. Like I could guess about an iodine deficiency. I could guess about goitrogens affecting the production of thyroid hormone, which as a carnivore, I'm sure you know all about. And so like there's a million different possibilities that could be affecting this sort of thing. And that's where, again, grounding this conversation to bioindividuality, it ultimately is like the individual's responsibility to pay attention like you are doing to, oh, I ate this food and I got a migraine. Oh, I've got this metallic taste in my mouth. I better like go lay down for a little bit and do some breathing exercises or whatever works for you. And
Right.
so like
I have
there
yet to be able to prevent a migraine with breathing, although I do breathing work, breath work, religiously. But it has not, it is yet to prevent it from happening, seems like. So I'm either not doing it long enough, which I try to hit my 8 minutes, but it doesn't seem to, because again, I have those different multi-dimension things going on, but I know I don't feel as well as I do when I do the breath work. So there's that.
yeah. Honestly, I just kind of like said breathing, like first thing that came to mind. I wouldn't even have suggested that. That's really cool.
Yeah. No, it's a staple for me. It's and aside from just wanting to have the oxygen flowing and things like that, it just kind of quiets my mind, gets me in a better state, that kind of thing. But that's sort of side from the
Literally,
migraines.
breathing like a breath work literally does slow your nervous system down. So in a sense, that would directly affect this. Get back to my notes because I can't remember the name, and I want to remember it. So I'm going to make a point to say this word a few
The
more
messy
times.
nerve.
Yeah, the messy nerve. Where is it at? Where'd you go, nerve? There we go. The trigeminal nerve. I'm gonna remember that by the end of the day. So I'm gonna make
Okay.
the trigeminal nerve. So yeah, when we do breath work, like I do a lot of like square breathing, just like 4 in, hold for 4, 4 out, hold for 4.
Sure.
The 4, 7, 8 breathing too, just like in for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. And like that's kind of my intention all the time is like I have some pretty severe nervous system like overstimulation, like I kind of let myself go sometimes, and it's really necessary to just kind of let
Yeah.
it all
Bring it
relax.
back in. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. So, are you up for taking a question? I have this
Yeah, let's do
question.
it.
It's pertaining to migraine. So, Jen 0687 writes that she recently started adding more greens, spinach, broccoli, those kinds of things to her diet, but it increased her migraines exponentially. Do you
Uh-huh.
think there's a correlation between
I
greens and migraines?
I certainly think that there could be. When we're talking about things like spinach and raw leafy greens, the big concern is oxalates typically.
Okay.
And then there are a variety of other like anti-nutritional properties that can come along depending on the plant you're talking about. Um, and I told you last time, I actually am very pro plant. I don't think anyone should be eating a plant-based diet whatsoever. I also think that the carnivore diet can be an excellent elimination diet. Um,
I
I
would
I
agree.
I work with some clients during doing carnivore. I typically don't keep them on carnivore for more than 6 months though. But
Agreed.
that aside, I think it's a really valuable high protein, high fat diet and super bioavailable nutrition as well. But just to qualify the points that I'm about to make, because plants really can hurt you. And some people like it's bizarre. We're talking about like kind of the mainstream medical infrastructure. Let me dive into this a little bit actually, because I think there's a really interesting psychology behind this thinking. I think that the kind of the dynamism between carnivore and vegan has a lot more to do with people's like psychology and cultural psychology than it does scientific.
100%. I don't want to say I'm a victim, but I have done both and not being successful on the vegan in the way that it destroyed me more so than I feel like the actual heart attack did. And then switching to carnivore and then now transitioning into animal based. I mean, it's night and day, and don't even get me started on the bugs and grasshoppers and things that like, I know that's supposed to be protein, but I can't even go there.
Don't eat the bugs. No, so plants, the psychology I'm talking about, I think that sometime in the 1900s, and I'm no expert on this, um, sometime in the 1900s, Senator George McGovern, along with a variety of Seventh day Adventist advisors, uh, were really influential on our nutritional guidelines in a pro
Interesting.
way. When you dive into that, Seventh day Adventism as a religion has actually had a lot of influence on our dietary recommendations. Actually, Loma Linda University, it's a Seventh Day Adventist university, is one of the blue zones. Funny enough, but they are actually like they're forthcoming about it. It's not a conspiracy theory, really, to say.
Sure.
So they've written papers like diving into their own religious influence on diet, and they think it's a good thing because they all think that we shouldn't eat meat and we should only eat plants because God said so or whatever. And so like
But that's not true. And if anybody's familiar with the Bible, that's not true at all.
well, that's the thing. It's a really bad interpretation by a 9-year-old who had a really severe head injury when she made the interpretation, Ellen G. White. But that aside, uh,
Okay.
Seventh Day Adventism emerged in at the same time as the temperance movement in America, which was like a bunch of people. That's what led to prohibition ultimately.
Sure.
A bunch of like fed up wives who were like dealing with abuse from their husbands. They put together this like countrywide. It's actually a crazy story. They put together like a countrywide coalition called the Temperance Movement that actively encouraged people to be sober and to not drink, and it got a lot of momentum. Actually, it became extremely popular for a few decades.
Yeah, obviously prohibition happened. Yeah.
Turn into policy, but it's really interesting. It took off like that, and it's because like in America in the you know early mid 1800s. I love history, so I feel qualified to
Oh,
talk
me
about.
too. I'm a history nerd.
I was an extremely violent place in almost all areas across the frontier, colonialism. The Civil War happened. Before the Civil War, we had a variety of Native American wars. They were all fighting each other at the same time too. It's just
Sure.
excuse my French, but a clusterfuck of
Right.
violence.
Right.
And so I think a lot of people kind of observed the human capacity to kill, right? And that's a really primal thing. I think a lot of people really associated that human capacity to kill with like brute force and irrational violence and kind of like a lot of what you see in like the altruistic minded
Sure.
people. And so I think that developed in this weird way over time where people associated that with killing animals and eating meat. As you see, veganism and vegetarianism, the Seventh day Adventist religion, arise in tandem with temperance and with this kind of collective intention to be more peaceful and be more mindful about what we put in our bodies and so on and so forth. And so, like, I think there was kind of this unconscious association that people made between like people who kill are bad and
Hmm.
animals are living. And so people who kill animals are bad. And like
Gotcha.
obviously it's not like a forthcoming, like people aren't
Sure.
actively working with that belief system, but I think kind of deep in people's cores that are vegans and are plant-based and oriented like that. That's all they think. And if you talk to vegans, like I dated a vegan in high school actually for a little bit, which is an interesting little story. But when you talk to vegans and kind of get involved in that community, like I really was involved in that community back then. I wasn't a
Hmm.
vegan, but they are very I mean, I'm going to speak kind of frankly here. You find a lot of like young women who don't respect their dads very much and kind of things like that. People who you find individuals who kind of abhor power, abhor like the assertion to power and really idealize again more altruistic intentions. They like idealize more communal ways of being. Maybe there's some validity to that too. Personally, I like power and competition and eating meat.
Sure. Sure.
That's not
Well,
really my
and
cup of tea, but I think
yeah.
that psychology really influenced a lot of people for a long time, and it speaks to this whole medical infrastructure of science that I'm trying to get to. Is I think that around the 50s, 60s, and 70s, like universities like Loma Linda really unconsciously believed, I think, that they were doing really good work
Yeah.
in creating science that validated their plant-based opinions. And I don't think it was like this conscious thing. Like obviously consciously they thought that it was a religious association, like they thought
Sure. And a
humanity.
better way.
Yeah. But I think unconsciously there's something really powerful about like, you know, the average human doesn't want to admit that he has to kill something to be alive. And it's like there's something strange about admitting that for most people that makes one feel like a killer in a way that's not like if when you're 16 years old and you get shown like a video of some animal farm cow getting slaughtered,
Sure. Sure.
right?
But I think that's part of the issue. We have sort of removed ourselves from the process, right? And instead of being, grateful and looking at it as a blessing and nourishment for our bodies, all of that's removed when you go to the big box store to buy your groceries and you there's no connection anymore, right? There's no connection of nourishment and, thankfulness that we are able to nourish our bodies with it. And it's completely removed. And I just think, not that all of us can afford to live on the, hundreds of acres of ranches and have our own food process right there, but we're missing that link. We're missing that, connection.
And for most of human history, that is kind of how we lived. It's strange. We've only gotten to a place where that's not collectively possible because of this alienation from the truth in a way.
Sure. Sure.
Weird, but that's exactly my point. Is that this is the issue. This is the issue. Is that these kind of psychological belief systems are governing people unconsciously.
Sure.
People who haven't really been involved in the process of food to table, who don't haven't really ever thought about it
Where it
critically
comes
at
from.
all.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
because your point is correct. Like if you are a vegan, there's a really famous example of like if you're a vegan and you eat avocados and you live in California, they fly in millions of bees from China every year to grow the avocados, and they all
Right.
die. And
Right.
that aside, if you grow a freaking banana tree farm in Chile, you have to kill a bunch of wombats and kill a bunch of beavers and
Right.
all the pests that are coming by trying to eat everything. So it's like
The
there's
industrialization. Right.
no way to live in the world without having a murderous impact in some
Sure.
kind. And
It's
so the point
well,
is like
but I'm not even sure that most vegans
works.
know that to be the case. They think that they're doing much better because it's something that's being grown from the ground and that's what they're eating. But me specifically,
Like a,
it was not a religious choice or it was thrust upon me after my heart attack and sold to me as this package of you will do so much better for your body if you live this way. As I'm trying to wrap my head around everything that's happened and like maybe start to buy into it, the copious amounts of soy alone that you had and the packages of looking at a plant-based burger with their 90 plus ingredients into a plant-based burger versus just the burger itself, and the way I was feeling and so anemic, they're talking blood transfusion. There's just no, for me personally, there was just no way I knew I could survive on. I wasn't going to survive on it at
yeah.
all.
That's I think what I'm speaking to is like you didn't fall for that myth, right? And that's what I'm talking about. I think is like
No, but I
and in,
did fall for the authorities telling me this would be the best for me because at the time, I trusted what they were telling me.
but I would say you didn't fall for the myth though, because you ultimately did think about it for yourself and come to your own conclusions, and it wasn't
Yeah.
this like unconscious obsession with like
True.
eating
Yes.
something. And that's more what I'm getting to is like not necessarily like why someone like you might have tried eating vegan, but why it was presented to someone like you in such a context. Because that's bizarre. It's bizarre that someone should have a heart attack and be told you should never eat meat again and only eat plants and there's nothing else you can do.
That's
That's
exactly
insane.
what I was told.
Like that is insane. Like let's like hover on that for a sec. That is absolutely insane.
Yep.
Like we talk about dogmatism, like people in the mainstream world like to make fun of holistic alternative practitioners because they say that like we don't think things through or like we will just preach some dogma or paint some boogeyman, right? What is that?
And
What exactly are doctors doing when they're telling you like meat is bad, take our drugs, and that's it?
yep.
That's a pseudoscience. That is, there's no better word to describe that approach to health and medicine. It's a pseudoscience.
Well, it, like I said, it took me, well, a minute. I'm a slow learner, but I finally caught on to it. But it was just, it didn't make sense. And then as they're pushing this statin on me, when my heart attack, I did not have high cholesterol, I did not have high blood pressure, but their whole sentence was, well, the statin will prevent the next heart attack. And my heart attack was directly related to high blood sugar. They didn't even touch on that. In fact, the hospital endocrinologist that came in before I went to go get the second stint while I was in the hospital, he didn't even know what to put my pump settings at to enforce the, slower drip of the insulin for me to go in and get. I mean, it was mind blowing. It was and he was the endocrinologist of the hospital. Mind blowing. And I knew then, maybe not so much as I know now, but something in my brain just saying, I can't trust these people. I can't put my life in their hands. Again, emergency medicine. And yes, they did save my life by getting me to the cath lab. But now I know I have to take control and be accountable. I mean, just blows my mind.
And it does beg the question of like, why did no one tell you that before you ended up in the
Exactly.
hospital? You know?
The thing that I had been told since 15 after being diagnosed with type 1 was watch your kidneys, watch your kidneys, watch your kidneys. So that would had been my focus for years. Make sure my kidneys are fine. Nobody
I
ever
bet
said
you're
anything
also
about my
told
heart.
I bet you're also told every time you had a blood sugar drop to eat carbs
Oh,
in the
yes.
middle of the night too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And then feeling what I call the hangover effects the next day, because now I've had these peaks and valleys of blood sugar. And I literally would feel like a hangover, just completely knocked on my ass of just, this is not like I'm recovering. It was terrible.
I bet when you switched to carnivore, it's probably one of the best you've ever felt in your life.
100%. And
That's
people
not surprising
they
at all.
can't understand it.
That's not surprising at all. And so it's like that's what I'm getting to is it's like because there's a side to that too. There is a side to like again, and this is what I was saying is I don't like to keep carnivore people on carnivore for like a prolonged period of time. And there's a side to that. Like there are some people that have, for instance, a lean mass hyper responsive genetic mutation, and they can hyper respond to saturated fats. There is
Okay.
like a small subsection that like does have to be concerned like that. And so it's like you could bring this whole thing back in the conversation of carnivore. But here's the difference between vegan and carnivore. There's not a doctor on the planet besides Paul Saladino who's going to tell you to eat carnivore and he's not allowed to have a practice.
It's
So
crazy to me.
that's the objective difference here. Is like people that eat carnivore that are like exploring carnivore, they're not. A lot of them do participate in dogmatism in some way or another. Paul Saladino, actually, if you listen to what he talks about, does not participate in dogmatism. He's very upfront about like this is a way to do it. This isn't
Yep.
the way. Like he literally will say that verbatim.
I love
But
him.
like,
I absolutely love him.
yeah, no, he's the man. And so it's like if you get into it, it's like there is no central authority for carnivore. There is no central authority for nutrition. There is none. And like that's a good thing, I would say. Most of the
Sure.
people that are participating in those cultures and those worlds have individualized those messages. They have done it in a way that's like working for them. They are experimenting and are open-minded because they don't have a choice.
Hmm.
There isn't an option to, well, I mean, people could say like Paul Saladino knows everything. I worship him. But even so, if they actually listen to what he's talking about, he's probably going to lead you to a deeper truth, which is he doesn't know everything.
Sure. Sure.
You shouldn't listen to him like that, as he'd probably be the first one to admit it. And so it's like you don't have this option to point at some clinical study that says meat cures cancer and say,
Right.
oh, this is the truth, you know, like
Right.
or something like that. And so it's like it does speak more to what I was talking about with the scientific infrastructure, kind of the religious aspect about it, which is like, you know, you do in the same way that like Paul Saladino had this idea of carnivorism, which it wasn't his idea, but you know, to
Right.
expand on that,
No,
some
yeah,
ideas.
exactly.
He had his
Well,
own ideas, and this largely emerged from the mind. Well, science is no different, right? Like veganism, statin drugs, pharmaceutical treatment in general. These are all ideas that some person had at some point in history. It's not like an objective, natural thing that we observed or discovered. Someone had these ideas, and
correct.
then
But I feel like, especially specifically talking with the statin, they, like you were talking about, you know, skewing the statistics and things for them to push this medicine. They're also keep moving the goalpost for what is considered high
oh yeah,
cholesterol to begin with. You
oh
know,
yeah,
you look back even just 5 years ago, it was a different number than it is today. Now they want everybody like 100 and under, and people are missing the message. We have all these new cases now of dementia and Alzheimer's because specifically they have zero cholesterol in their body, and the cholesterol is what protects them from that. And I sound crazy when I say it. Nobody wants to believe me when I say that.
I talked about this on the last show. Like this point that I'm making, like all of this stuff is ultimately just someone's idea, and then it gets qualified as like this low fat thing, this statin crap, cholesterol is bad. This was a brainchild. This whole idea was a brainchild of someone named Ansel Keys. I talked about him on the last show. He was associated with Procter and Gamble and the American Medical Association. He facilitated a lot of backdoor exchanges of funds between the two programs or between the two agencies. And he was the doctor who did the science called the 7-country study that has created our idea that saturated fat is bad. It was literally all just emerged from his mind. And the people that challenged him were cut off and censored. And the people that validated him were rewarded. And it's like it's the same. It's kind of like this religious hierarchy again. It's like if you show faith in our church, we will reward you, and
Sure.
so on and so forth. And so it's like all of this stuff. It's like I want to the big pharma playbook. I'm planning to do like a really big section on
I
statins.
can't wait. I
Exactly what
cannot
it
wait.
is. You're gonna be probably shocked, like even with everything you know about how deep it goes. But
Oh, I'm
um,
sure. I can only imagine. I'm barely even scratching the surface, and this is just personal experience. I can't even imagine. And I think what is terrible and what troubles me so much is the amount of people it's actually hurting, and they keep on pushing it.
well, that's I think the ultimate point I'm trying to make too is like when you are so invested with your identity and every being of who you are in such a powerful myth, meaning like you are, you know, the myth of medicine is their
Sure.
pioneering technology to save those who've been at the mercy of nature forever. That's a heroic, that's a heroic myth. It's like I think, I don't know. There is a lot to be said about people that just don't want to accept that that's not who they are. Like
Sure.
doctors don't want to accept that they're not this superhero that is saving everybody. They would rather say someone like you or me is coming on here saying like statins are bad are liars and quacks and crazy people, because it's like it's easier to believe that than to believe that what you are doing is wrong and that you might have even been lied to about it.
Right.
And so I don't know. All things bizarre. I do think a lot of people are waking up though. It's like what you're saying is like a lot of people are suffering and like like I am in a position to help people now. And that's kind of like what I do. I'm lucky to be able to do that. But like I'm a young person and like I don't have like the only reason that I'm in this position is because, and this is gonna sound kind of like self-aggrandizing. So sorry, but like my life was so difficult, like so profoundly difficult. And so it was like um I learned all of these things and kind of got to this place out of necessity.
Sure.
And like I also don't really know what I'm talking about in a lot of ways too, I want to say. Like
I don't think that's true, but
I'm some kid that got really sick and had to do something about it. So like we see all these people that are like getting really sick and are kind of being forced to do something about it. Like it's been bizarre the last few years how many people have switched over to this side of the playing field,
yeah.
thinking about it in a more holistic way because they simply don't have another choice. It's like what you're talking about with your experience, veganism and everything else. It's like your body is at a point, and not like your body, but the general, like when someone's in this place, it's like your body is at a point where, it's trying to self-destruct. You can feel it all the
Yep.
time. It's an anxiety provoking thing. Is you're like at death's door in a certain way. And so it's like
Yeah.
you have to start asking questions like, why do I feel this way? And then you might learn a little bit about nutrition and food. And then you have to ask yourself, like, well, why is the food supply so messed up? And then you might learn about like
It's those rabbit holes I always talk about. One rabbit hole leads to the next rabbit hole. But again, I think, to your point of saying people are coming over to this side, I really hope so for their sake. I really do,
Yeah.
because in the general hospital setting and the people that were in this group with me, everybody bought it hook, line, and sinker. I mean, 100%. They went in home and threw all of their old food out. They went in, they changed every time how they were shopping, what they were buying. I mean, it was so profound. I mean, they had us watching that Netflix show Game Changer and showing us how the doctor had pulled the blood from the one athlete and the one, what I'm talking about is you're upset about it. But everybody's wide-eyed and watching that going, well, yeah, I want clear blood. Then if I have to have clear blood, then I can't eat the meat. And just looking back on my experience and going, what a dumbass I was, like, but I had nothing to compare it to. Here I was, like you said, on death's door.
You were a victim. And
Yes.
that's something I want to touch on here a little bit. Is like, it's not just for their sake. Like I have a 6-month-old son. It's for his sake.
Right.
Like everyone that I know, probably like everyone you know now, is sick.
Yeah.
It's not like a rare thing. We're all sick. On a political level, we all hate each other and are fighting each other. On a religious level, none of us have any belief in anything.
In anything.
All nihilists. On a nutritional biochemical level, we're all under attack. Like we are living in like, I mean, like the age of the Antichrist, quite frankly. And so it's like, I think for the sake of the future of the world, it's like so that the next generation doesn't grow up being sheep in a human farming cycle, so that they're not mentally debilitated and can't think through these things and work for themselves, so that there isn't the global infrastructure that extrapolates our own individual freedoms and prohibits us from doing the things that make life worth living. It's like this is something we should be angry about.
Exactly.
Like upset and sad, like which that we all should feel that way, and that's super valid too. But like I'm getting to a place like I feel mad.
Yeah.
And more people should, because people aren't stupid. Most people are pretty smart. Almost everyone I've ever met and talked to is just as smart as I am. But they're all being lied to.
And they're accepting the lies. I accepted it.
Well, they've been taught to put their faith into these people forever. And so why wouldn't they? There isn't an alternative that's been presented to us. And frankly, like I'm mad about it. Yeah. I think people are getting mad about it. That's why we're seeing this awakening is like, like I want to stay like, screw you, big pharma, like screw you.
Well, and I think though, too, in order to make change, we have to get mad. We
Yeah.
have to get mad. And, I'll tell you, being called and told that, you're 2 points away from needing a blood transfusion. And they were the ones that told me to eat how I was eating. I was mad. I was mad.
As you should be, as you should have been, and look at the amazing changes that it's elicited.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm blessed to be able to say the same thing.
Yeah.
So there
And while
is
we don't want people to have to go through trials and tribulations, if it spurs change, if it spurs them getting their attention and trying to find an alternative to do something about it, then we have to. We absolutely have to.
yeah. So that's, I guess, that's been my like theme of reckoning lately.
I love it. I love it. So just circling back really quick, then you would think, and not that you can tell the person with the question, but it seems like if she were to go back and eliminate,
Yeah,
um,
here would be my suggestion. We went way off topic. So
no, but
sorry.
it's messy. I love it. Like that's what we do here.
I would say that they are having an obvious reaction to these leafy greens. So whenever I deal with food sensitivities, I recommend people to do an elimination diet. And I recommend people repeat this process throughout over time too. So the idea with something like plant anti-nutrients, anti-nutrients kind of speak for themselves. There are certain inflammatory parts of plants and so on and so forth. There's inflammatory parts of every food, really. But the real issue with plant foods are that they exacerbate the nutritional deficiencies that are already there.
Okay.
So, like oxalates, for instance, bind with calcium in the body. It's actually the number one, if I remember correctly, it's either the number one or number two cause of kidney stones are calcium oxalate kidney stones. Basically, this causes like a calcium deficiency. And so when it comes to like the neck and tension of the neck and the nerves, like that obviously translates. Calcium is responsible for contracting the muscles, it's responsible for bone density. You go down the list here when it comes to structural integrity in calcium. And that aside, magnesium is something we already mentioned. Calcium and magnesium work in tandem with each other. They're cofactors to each other. And so becoming deficient in calcium, your calcium levels being affected immediately affect your magnesium levels, which does have an immediate impact on your state of nervous relaxation and this oh god, I'm gonna look at it again. This trigeminal, is that what it is? Come on, notes.
I think you're right.
Oh, trigeminal. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. See, you said you'd learn it by the end of the day. You did.
That's how you do it, people. Let's say, yeah, that's the idea would be like, again, not that this is what is happening, but from a nutritional perspective, here's one dimension that could be contributing to this. So I would say cut out plant foods, but do it in a way that's intentional. So obviously I would do it immediately, but I would plan to do it for a span of 8 to 12 weeks.
Oh, wow. That's a good amount of time.
I would not cheat at all. A 100% strict elimination diet. At the end of that 8 to 12 week process, I would experiment with raw leafy greens. I would add them into a diet, but I would make sure to cook them through 100%.
Okay.
That's a really big point about like one of the most popular anti-nutrients in plant foods are phytates.
Mm-hmm.
Form phytic acid when they bond with zinc. But phytates are what makes vegetables crunchy, or like rice, for instance, what makes rice crunchy. So if you cook your vegetables soft, you technically cook out all the phytates. And the idea is you have to drain the water and most of the anti-nutritional properties are gone. So I like to say with people who are having these reactions to vegetables, take some time off of them. And then when you reintroduce them, just cook them thoroughly, like cook them soft.
So that's interesting. I've heard that if you cook them, though, you're also cooking out all of the nutrients that's beneficial. That's true?
That's the trade-off. That's the catch.
So then it kind of is, to me, it's like, what's the point?
There is an interesting point there. Well, you're not getting away all of the nutrients. It's kind of the catch. You're getting away a lot of them. So you're degenerating the nutritional quality. But a lot of the nutrients are preserved in the physical structure of the vegetable. And
Okay.
so you still are getting some veg. And it's also like a low calorie form of carbs too, which
But
can be,
compared to a grass-fed hamburger patty,
yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna
no.
say go with the grass-fed hamburger patty for your bioavailable nutrients.
Well, that's where we could get into like you don't always eat everything for those kinds of nutrients. So
Sure.
like plant foods, the big nutrient benefit would be fiber. And we'd
Okay.
have to get into it like you could get into a debate about fiber, and it's not technically essential for anything in the body, but it is technically essential for gut health and like the stability of the gut microbiome. So there are a lot of nuance that you could get into here. But
Okay.
you make that is a really good point what you're making, because the reason people are obsessed with plant foods and are obsessed with vegetables are because they think that they have this like magical nutrient quality that they don't really have.
They don't.
And then when you do cook them like that to get rid of the bad stuff, you get rid of a lot of the good stuff
The
too.
good stuff.
That is a
Yeah.
good point. And so that's like, vegetables, like the way I like to conceive vegetables is like I like to eat a lot of purple vegetables in my diet just because they have good phytonutrients for the brain. I also eat something called Himalayan tartary buckwheat bread.
What is
Um,
that?
basically, like it's a type of buckwheat that's grown in the Himalayas, at like a really high elevation and under a lot of stress. In plants, the nutrients in plants are called phytonutrients, is like what we typically say the good stuff are. A typical vegetable has like um 10 to 20 phytonutrients in its phytonutrient content, but Himalayan tartary buckwheat has like 200 plus.
Oh, wow.
It's like the most nutrient dense vegetable plant food kind of in the world, whatever.
And
And
you
there's
can get that here?
I just get it on Amazon.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, it's cheap though. It's like $20 a bag, and
Okay.
you get a few different rounds with it. But it's like the way it's grown is under such high stress that it does have a much lower anti-nutritional content too, and so you get a lot more bang for your buck. But
Gotcha.
with something like the point I'm ultimately trying to make though is like I don't really eat vegetables for the nutrients, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah,
I'm into like kind of like functional, like not bodybuilding, but like working out and stuff like that. And
sure.
so like I like to use vegetables to get my macros in and
Sure.
to make sure I'm getting a certain amount of fiber and that sort of thing. I'm not very concerned about phytonutrition because
Right. You're
first of all, I
not
have
you're not
those.
worried about the vitamin A and things like that because you're getting that elsewhere.
That's
This is
another, yeah.
yeah.
And to that point, meat would be if you want to get your micronutrients from food and you have the options between plants and meat, it's meat 10 times out of 10. There's no way to argue
And
about
people absolutely look at me crazy when I say that. They think I've just lost my mind. They don't understand why I'm not having a giant big green leafy salad. And I just first of all, that totally tears up my stomach, but I show them the list. Like there's a side by side. In fact, I think it's even Paul Saladino's one of his cookbooks I have. There's a side by side comparison of like the nutrients that you get like out of kale versus the actual grass fed. And it's like, why are they eating kale? That doesn't make any sense.
what's the whole it's the myth, right? It's like it
Right.
doesn't fit people's mythology.
Right. Right. It's
That's
absolutely
it.
crazy.
That's
So
I do have to go here in a minute. I do
sure,
want
sure,
to
sure. No, I
I need
so
to wrap.
appreciate your time.
This has been an awesome conversation.
Absolutely. Before you go really quick, tell us about the ebook that you
Yeah,
recently came out with.
so I just released my Heal Yourself protocol. Basically, it's a huge compilation of dietary recommendations, biohacking methods, supplement recommendations. So it's kind of just jam packed with like a lot of the strategies and methods that I use in my health coaching program. The purpose is kind of just to give people a kind of like a catalog or an almanac, if you
Sure.
will,
A
just
resource.
exactly of just a bunch of different methods that they can experiment with in their own lives, as well as kind of like what everything is used for, how I use them in my life, like so on and so forth. So I have like my general bad foods list that I suggest people to eat. I have an elimination diet protocol. I have a list of good foods I suggest for people to add, like bone broth and organ meats, for example. I have a home cooking guide in there with a few different easy
Wow. Okay, I'm gonna
recipes.
have to go check that out. So how
A
can we get it?
lot of stuff. Basically, just go to my website. It's the very first thing you'll see on there, just haywoodheals.com. You can also find the link to my website on my Instagram account, which is just at Haywood Heals.
Okay.
And yeah, you can just download it. Just click add to cart, check out, and and download it completely for free.
That's amazing. And also, so if others have questions to email you directly or to get in touch with you directly, just go to your Instagram.
Yeah. So just you can Instagram DM me or you can email me at haywoodheals@gmail.com.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, so the Heal Yourself protocol, it's kind of a condensed version of the health coaching program. So one thing I do want to say to people is I'm open to answer any questions at any time because I don't want to just kind of strand people with these suggestions with no real way to ask about them. So feel free to reach out. I get to all my messages. I'm always happy to have a conversation. So if anyone has any questions or wants to learn a little bit more, I'm more than happy to.
That's awesome. I appreciate your time so much. I'm sorry we went over. I
Oh,
just
no,
completely enjoy your knowledge and
I'm down a rabbit hole
everything.
with you.
No, you just have so much to offer. So I just, we could, like I said, go on and on. We'll have to have you back. There was definitely some things we didn't get to, so we'll have to have an excuse to bring you back again. Like I said, our resident expert health coach, and I totally appreciate everything that you've offered. And it's been just an awesome pleasure. Thank you so much.
No excuse needed. The pleasure is all mine. Thank you again.
All right. Thanks, Haywood.